here we are. We finally did it. Season 2, Episode 2 of Now Hear Me Out with Ayana Jackson. It took us 3 times. This is our 3rd time doing it, and we've had way too many troubles with the audio and just all this nonsense, but we figured it out. I have Ayana Jackson here. We got John Carraher, our video producer, who's going to be running our YouTube account, which is NHMO Podcasts. Also the Instagram, NHMO.podcast. Today we're going to be talking about kind of just the political divide, the riots, white privilege, and a few others. I'm with Ayana Jackson here, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi guys, I'm Anna, or Ayana, and I'm excited to be here.
So yeah, your real name is Ayana, but you go by Anna, so if you hear us say either one, there you go. All right, well, let's get into it. So let's first talk about this divide. It's crazy. It was like in 2020, every day I'd just wake up and it'd be like something new on the TV or something that just seemed to divide us even more, to where it was almost like literal. And in 2020, we really saw that with so many different things, with COVID-19, George Floyd, the tragic death of George Floyd, and the election. So it was crazy. Last year was a huge thing for us as a country, and it really brought out a lot that I feel like was underneath the surface, like all the dirty, nasty stuff that was kind of hidden before, and it showed other countries kind of who we are as a real country. Anna, what do you think played like kind of just a major role in the divide this last year?
Being honest, I really feel like the previous administration played a big role in the divide, because I think that when, as a country, we're going through tough times, and like we were going through a pandemic, we were going through a movement, we were just going through a lot as a country, and I think that it was more kind of red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican, rather than being a whole country, and that just kind of fueled the divide. And with each thing that we continued to face, it was more like me against you rather than we're unified as a country. So yeah,
it almost felt like we were literally divided. A lot of, like you said, red versus blue, and a lot of other things that happened in the year kind of just almost seemed to fall underneath the category. Like if you were, besides obviously politics in general, but if you were against the riots and against that, you were red. You were labeled as red, and if you were big into promoting the Black Lives Matter movement, then you were very blue. And that wasn't necessarily the case all the time, and it wasn't never the case. But yeah, definitely there was just this huge divide. What do you think that we need to do for the country in order to not have like a repeat of 2020? So we don't have to end up calling ourselves the reunited states. What do you think we should do it just as a country?
I think as a country, we need to kind of step outside of ourselves and be more aware that, like, just because maybe I'm not going through something, that doesn't mean anybody else in the country isn't going through that, and to really be there for people as a country, I think that we're all Americans and we all have similar hopes and dreams. And so I think our country was built on certain ideals, and we've lost our way. We've lost those ideals, I think, especially through 2020, and we just kind of threw those out the window. So I think just being aware of others around us and aware of the situation we're in and how to make things better, not only for ourselves, but for our communities. I think that's really important in order to stay unified, because as we saw, there was a lot of disconnect.
Yeah. And you can kind of divide it in between what the government needs to do and what the people need to do. Obviously, we saw a lot of extremists on both sides in 2020, and especially on January 6th of 21, we definitely saw an extreme act of terrorism. But so the people, again, like you said, and then the government, I feel like what the government can do, which you also pointed out that the last administration almost didn't really, I feel like, address the divide more to say, and I think they could have done a better job with that. And the people, we obviously saw a lot of extremism, so it was an easy divide that we could see. Again, big parts of the divide being the passing of George Floyd, the protests, looting, on being a part of the African American community, what are your thoughts and feelings on all the rioting and looting that happened in Minnesota? And do you think that they justify the death of George Floyd?
I think that the death of George Floyd, I think that it was tragic, and it was also important because it was the beginning of the movement. I think that this was a long time coming. I think it was just like, it just boiled over. Because this happens in the community, we've been seeing police brutality for years now. And I think it's all stemmed into kind of the way America was built. And there's that systemic racism going all the way back to slavery. And I think that that's why this whole movement was really important, to kind of bring those issues more into the light. And so people are they see them now and they recognize them, and they're trying to change them slowly but surely. I think with the rioting and looting, I think that completely, I don't personally, I feel it gets frustrating when that's being discussed, because I think it takes away from the importance of the whole movement. I think
I agree.
People say like, oh, but there were rioters and looters, but no, we're talking about the movement. That just seems like a scapegoat. And I think that when we see, on contrast to what happened on January 6th, it's kind of frustrating, because I'm not saying that it's, us versus them, but it's just makes you think about it. Like, I wonder why these people were treated differently, even though they were completely different circumstances. Why, when there were peaceful protests, there was a lot of violence in response to it, but while there were people actually trying to hurt politicians in the Capitol, they weren't met with that same violence. I'm not saying violence is the answer. I'm not saying violence should always be used, but it just makes you think about it. And I think that a lot of people have been kind of thinking about it because of everything that's happened.
Yeah, you said it really great. You said that with the systemic racism, the police brutality that we've been seeing for years and years and years, you said that it's just being seen and it's kind of being brought to attention. And while I do think that 2020 helped the movement to be seen, I think there was always kind of a call, or kind of like a sense that something was wrong in the community. But for some reason,
much bigger scale now.
Much bigger scale now, yeah. But America, a lot of people I feel like didn't want to address it. So it was really hard to kind of bring that to attention. And sadly, we had to have tragic incidents happen, and for them to be kind of shown to everybody. So yeah, like you said, violence isn't the answer. Nobody has really said that violence is the answer, unless, again, you're an extremist, which we've seen. This MLK quote that I pulled out, which I thought was really great. He said, as you press on for justice, be sure to move with dignity and discipline, using only the weapon of love. Let no man pull you so low as to hate him. Always avoid violence. If you succumb to the temptation of using violence in your struggle, unborn generations will be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness, and your chief legacy to the future will be an endless reign of meaningless chaos. So I think he was just kind of promoting nonviolence, which is also what Gandhi did, trying to get away from British rule. But he was saying that if you invoke violence, it will, as you said, generations will be the recipients of a long and desolate night of bitterness. So it was almost like he sent a warning to all the looters, saying, hey, if you do this, if you fall into that category and you happen to do this, you're going to be looked at, and the cause is going to be hidden, and you're going to look like an idiot. And I think that's what he meant, and I think that's what happened.
I think that quote, I think that quote is important, but then again, I think it's frustrating because when people like feel tired and frustrated, they feel like their voice is not heard. When they've tried everything else, it's hard to not act in violence, I guess. I'm not condoning the looters, I'm not condoning the rioting, but I think that when people are frustrated, there's just that thing that boils over. When your people are being killed, it's frustrating. So I just think that, MLK also said, like, riots are the language of the unheard. And I think that people have been feeling unheard. And I think that's what's frustrating. I do think that I agree that with the riots and stuff, the message of the movement was somewhat diminished, but I think that it still should be as important. I think that shouldn't be the main takeaway of everything that we saw in these past previous months.
And you know what? I pretty much 100% agree with you. I think that, that when people aren't heard to and they feel like they're not listened to, I didn't really think this at first. I kind of just saw what was happening and just automatically thought this was an act of violence and this is how they responded. But then as I've done this with you now 3 times, and we're talking about it, I think, okay, well, when a little baby, think of any baby, when they're angry or they don't get what they want or people are ignoring them, what do? They throw their fist in the air, and naturally, as a human, when you feel like you're not heard and you're ignored, you're gonna get violent. That's just how we are. Now, to the scale that it got and what happened and the repercussions of that, that's a whole separate thing. I think that you and I, neither of us advocate for that, and we both disagree with the actual violence that happened. But that doesn't make the message of what they were trying to say any less powerful. And I do think that that while it sucked and while I wish none of that would have happened, I don't think anybody did. It definitely raised awareness. And also, like you said, this kind of generalization between the protests and the looting. Like, there's so many. I live in LA. I see them. There's so many peaceful protests, and it's almost like they don't get seen because everyone just wants to talk about the looting and the rioting, and I feel like that just undermines the actual protest cause and just makes the whole, like I've said before, make the whole movement look bad. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I kind of said that too. I said that I think that the movement itself has really positive things about it and things that we need to be aware of.
Yeah.
And I think that should be on the forefront. So.
Yeah, and it has been. It seems like every week, every month, we're kind of learning more and figuring ourselves out more as a country. So I feel like this ties into our topic that we wanted to talk about of white privilege. My stance is that I do believe it exists, and I do think it's sad. I wish it wasn't a thing. I wish it was gone. And some people don't believe that white privilege exists, and it's hard to understand that, because I do think that it exists. But the people that don't believe that it exists, some people think they're racist, and then it's just this big like circling thing, and again, it gets undermined, and it's just this whole big spiraling out of control nonsense term that's being used now. Anna, give us your definition of white privilege and how you believe it is embedded into people or communities or what?
Well, I think so. White privilege, my opinion of it is basically, if you're white, you have white privilege. Not saying that's a negative term, that's not like discriminatory under any circumstances. It's just that simply because you were born white, there are certain doors that will open easier for you than it will for other people of color. And I think we discussed this because we talked about it a lot. But if you talk about real estate and finances,
right.
If you see there was redlining during segregation, and black families and Asian families, they couldn't be in certain neighborhoods with those real estate values that
right.
white families could. So therefore, that family was able to pass down that property for generations. So then, in present day, this white child has all of this property that will be passed down to them. And I think that that's different for black families.
Yeah.
And I think that families of color in general, I think it's kind of like if you're all lined up for a race and you're at the starting line, but because somebody else is not somebody else is a person of color, they just start behind you, and then you say go, and you're all running to the same spot, success, but you just got that, you started at the starting line. Another person didn't start at the start. They started a couple steps back. Right. So they have to kind of catch up. And I think that's what white privilege is. And I think that it's important to, as a white person, to understand that you do have it and use that to call attention to the issues. It's not something we can erase overnight because it's so deeply embedded into our society as Americans. But I think that it's definitely something that needs to be people need to be aware of.
Right. And for the people that don't know, real estate goes a long way. So, it determines if you get a piece of land back in 1860, that really is going to determine the rest of your family outcome. It really is. It's going to determine how you get a job, where you get a job, where your kids go to school. And like Anna said here, with the redlining, that really affected people in such a terrible way that contributes to this, that contributes to white privilege. So a lot of people, including myself before, really just thought that white privilege meant that, if you go to a store, or a bakery or whatever, we see it so many times in movies and shows, they're just going to get this, how would you even say it? They'd get some sort of bonus or something that African American people wouldn't get. And because that's in Hollywood and that's kind of what they show, that's what a lot of people just think white privilege is. And doing this podcast 3 times now has really shown me that there's so much more to it. Like you said, the real estate. I didn't even think about that before. I won't lie. And that really did open my eyes. So what do you think we can do to try to eliminate white privilege? I mean, like you said, it can't be done overnight, but what can we do just kind of as a country to limit it?
I think just being aware is a big part of it, and just I think that understanding, like, okay, this is, it's hard to say, I guess, because I'm lucky from where I'm standing. My parents were both, they met at Harvard. My parents own houses. I'm lucky because I've had that. I have privilege, I'm not even going to, we live here. We go to an awesome school. I'm not even going to deny that, I have a lot of privilege. And
Are you going to Harvard?
No. But I think that just being aware of the privilege you have and understanding, okay, well, what can I do to give back and to change and make it aware and spread information? I think that's really important. And just understanding that not everyone has those privileges, because we go to an awesome school with all these resources and all this money, that may not be the case for someone who lives 3 miles away, just because we're in this kind of comforted bubble. I think that I'm doing this on a general scale. It's not just white privilege. I think it's privilege in general.
Yeah.
So I think just that's it. Yeah.
I think you said that really well. I totally agree with you. And I'm glad that after doing this so many times, we kind of sifted it out and figured it out. That's going to be it for today. I think we had a great discussion. Thank you so much, Anna, for coming on. I was so stoked to see your name in the podcast submission form, which you all can fill out in the link in my bio on the Instagram. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having
John,
me.
great camera work. Thank you so much. We just hit 2,000 podcast downloads. So thank you to everybody who has continued to watch and who is going to continue to watch. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend. And thanks for tuning in on another episode of Now Hear Me Out.